Welcome to the XM Podcast. Here is your host, mental health therapist, Matthew Kanabe.
I am very hard on myself, dealt with severe anxiety.
And it made me feel like a monster. I didn't have the energy to care.
There was just nothing more but to face what I had been running from.
I'm already an anxiety-filled mess.
It's just love. Like, it just goes back to love.
Well, here we are, season 6, and it sounds kind of unbelievable. 102 episodes, 6 continents, 81 countries, and 2,483 cities have all listened to the XM Podcast. Thank you for sharing, thank you for liking, and thank you for contributing to this little podcast that could. So today is the day many of you, I am sure, have been waiting for a very long time, whether you realized it or not. Today, I spent time with one of my closest friends. I have mentioned him directly and indirectly on this podcast so many times I can't even count. It's imperative to have close friends like this in life. I know many would disagree, but deeply I believe you cannot navigate life alone. This is my brother, my mentor, my best friend, one of the most influential people in my life for sure, a bandmate, accountability partner, my partner in crime, dynamic duo. You get the picture. Please welcome to the show one of the kindest people I know, my friend, Jason Rice.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I can't believe it's been 6 seasons and you haven't been on here yet.
I know. I've listened. I've cried while I've been mowing my lawn listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And I love what you do, and I think it's a great thing that you do with this podcast, and
Thanks,
it's helped
man.
me, and I love the stories. I love hearing people and change lives, and what counseling's done for them, what relationship with Jesus has done for them. It's pretty great.
So I know I've mentioned your name on the podcast many times, and I talk about guys that I do life with, and we're going to get into that. But to talk to our audience, who is Jason Rice? Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your family, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I live in Kent. I've got married to my high school sweetheart, and Nicole, and we have 2 kids. My son Tyler, who is a senior at University of Miami University, whichever one's in Ohio. I should know. I pay the bills, but he's a senior this year, going to be graduating. And my daughter McKenna is a freshman at University of Cincinnati.
Yeah.
So, we're in a different stage of life, being empty nesters.
Yeah.
For my daily, I do project management and development, have for probably 20 years. Just went through a change of job, couple changes, which you know about last couple years, but just landed into a new position. So just learning that. You and I played music a long time ago.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about our journey. You and I met, I think the first time you and I met, I think I was in 8th grade, and you may not even remember this, but I think our Young Life leader, Lewis, was allowing some 8th graders that summer of the transition into freshman year come to like a club, and we were able, I think Josh, my buddy John Kessick, a handful of us came, and you played.
Yeah.
So that was going into my freshman year, but I didn't really know you, but that was the first time I think you were on my radar. And then you were probably a junior at that point, because I think my freshman year you were a senior, I think.
No,
So
I was graduated. I just graduated.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize you were that old.
I am old. I'm really old. Careful.
Yeah. So my freshman year, you were a freshman in college.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where you and I
Yeah.
kind of connected on the music thing. And it wasn't much longer after that, we started a band called Purge.
Yeah.
Which I was going through some of my stuff last night and found a bunch of our records. And I was probably going about 16 years old.
Yeah.
And we played all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, we did. We played all over. It was a lot of fun. We practiced in Josh's parents' basement, and and then traveled around. And then I remember, getting the van and driving, and graduated and went to Kent for a hot minute.
I was enrolled at Kent.
You went for a hot second.
Yeah.
I don't know how many classes you went to, but not very many.
My grade point average that year showed.
Yeah. But, leading up to that, the music was a thing. And then obviously, Young Life brought us together. And, I have wonderful memories of you being a junior leader in the cabin and lots of funny stories that could go along, but we probably shouldn't share those on the podcast. And just watching you and getting to know you and your family and your brother. And, we just, it was a brotherhood pretty quickly.
Well, would you be able to share a little bit about your faith journey and kind of like where, coming out of childhood and the way you were raised and how you were introduced to the Lord? Yeah.
So, I would say I grew up in a sort of Christian home. My grandmother on my dad's mom was really the backbone for Christianity. I remember her reading the Bible to us and singing. And, when I was little, her rocking me in a rocking chair and singing praise songs, singing hymns. And then, we went to church for a little bit and then stopped going for a long time. I lived the life of a middle schooler and a high schooler, and probably maybe a little bit. I was off the rails pretty hard in high school and middle school with all the things I was doing, and alcohol and drugs. And Young Life, Lewis, who you mentioned, was showing up at practices, and then I started going to Young Life Club because Nicole, my now wife, was there. So I followed the girl.
Yeah.
And and then God grabbed a hold of me, and it was at Saranac in New York, which is one of Young Life's camps, that committed my life to Christ. And, never look back. God's done amazing things in me and through me and in spite of me in many ways.
Yeah.
So...
And I'll share this, with our listeners. You were one of the pivotal people that really kind of helped reinforce the faith that I had growing up. I've shared my story on the podcast, growing up in a Christian home, but a lot of it was me living out my parents' faith and not my own. Mm-hmm. And it was those first couple years early on in high school where guys like yourself and, the crew, there was a handful of guys that were, living that out and breathing life into younger guys. I was very fortunate to be the recipient of a really strong group of guys who were a couple years ahead of me that were modeling and caring and sharing scripture and praying, and really brought us into a culture that I think, you and I kind of talked even before doing this podcast, it was really ingrained in you and I about how we walk this thing out called Christianity that I don't know that everybody gets. Yeah. And that's kind of the purpose of our podcast today. Is in complete transparency, Pamela, our president's wife, a couple months ago, they were going out on a speaking engagement, which they do a lot. And she asked me about, do you have any resources or podcasts that you've done on, community or what's the word I'm looking for?
Doing life together.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't. And it kind of shocked me that, going through 100 and some episodes, we haven't really focused on, accountability and that kind of thing. And so as soon as she said that, I was like, well, I already know who I'm going to bring on that podcast. You and I literally have been doing this on and off for 30 years.
Yeah.
And really, really strongly in high school. And then we kind of got up to the point where I briefly attended Kent State University. And then there was a break in our relationship, other than we were aware. Like, I think I was aware you were alive and doing well, but we weren't in relationship. Right. And then fast forward probably 15 years after that, our paths reconvened, and that's where we'll settle for most of our podcast. But let's talk about, so you and I developed that relationship. You were early on in college. I was early on in high school. And I felt like it grew really, really strong, and we developed a foundation of checking in on each other all the time. And, I don't remember if it was once a week, but it seemed like it was. You, me, and our other buddy Josh would go to breakfast. We would go to breakfast early in the morning before school and check in and have devotionals. And what are some of your thoughts about that era?
Yeah. I mean, I think not to do, shameless plugs of Young Life, which I think is a great tool.
Yeah.
But, it's Young Life's premise is that you go where, with their high school ministry, they have other ministries, but with high school ministry, you go where the high school kids are, you earn the right to be heard. Mm-hmm. And so it means you're showing up and you're putting in the time and you're putting in the effort and you're remembering to ask, or you're remembering stats for a sports team or whatever it might be, so that you can build a relationship. And then ultimately, share the gospel. And it's just a culture that, impacted me. And so then I just wanted to live it out. And so I think that was ingrained in us. Just from the beginning. And then it just blossomed beyond, because what happens in that, right? You build these organic relationships. It's not like they just go away, right. And we stayed connected a lot longer. We had the band, and then, when we had the break, which, you went and were very successful in the music industry. And I still, our friend was riding back. We were coming back from OU.
Oh, I'll never forget that trip.
And we
remember OU, like remember the Alamo.
Right. And we had 2 high school girls in the back.
That sounds weird. It wasn't weird.
It wasn't weird.
They were good friends of ours.
They were, and they were going down to see the older sister that was down there. And they were like teary-eyed in the back because the band was breaking up.
Yeah, on that trip.
That's
exactly right.
And then, we broke. I knew what you were doing. I was following what you were doing, but there was a lot in me that I was holding on to. I was jealous of what you were doing in the music industry. I was farther along in my collegiate, getting my degree. And then I had my now wife, but my long-term girlfriend who I was planning on marrying, and, trying to go off and follow music was not in my cards at the time, but I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And so, I held that over you. Mm-hmm. And judged a lot of what was going on.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah. Which was not healthy. Mm-hmm. And by any stretch of the imagination for me or for you. But it wasn't healthy for me to hold on to any of that. It wasn't healthy for me to judge you on all that stuff. And so when we came back together, when you came back and we were able to get together, it was very healing.
Yeah.
To be able to air that to you and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Eye-Opening Moments podcasts are real-life stories of adversity, encounters, and perspectives. They are moments that can lift your spirits, give you some food for thought, or move you. For the introspective mind that likes to reflect, discover, and find solutions or meaning in a complex life, listen to Eye-Opening Moments podcasts.
And which wasn't easy.
Yeah.
I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. I'm a challenger with the 7 frequent. Like I'm the guy that, shuts people down when I talk, which I did to you back then many a times. And it wasn't easy, but God calls us, right, to be transparent. And I just knew I needed my brother back.
Yeah.
And it was so healing to have you
and
back.
I knew even at 18, 19 years old where I was going, you weren't able to go. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you would have gone.
Yeah.
Josh, on the other hand, was just blindly following. I know we're sharing names that people don't know about, but, one of the guys in the band, he was able to follow. He and I were in different stages of life. And, but I think the beautiful thing through that part of our story and our journey is there was a separation as far as, the connectivity, but that doesn't mean we can't lay that down and move forward. Like, I just feel like so many times, and maybe this is a cultural thing right now, that, if you don't agree with all of me, then there's a complete wedge between us, and there is no reconciliation. And I feel like that's a shame, because the reality is you and I have been friends for over 30 years.
Yeah. If
we don't have some type of a disagreement in that, then something's off, because that's not reality either. But the problem is, if that is inevitable, which I think it probably is in any relationship of any time like that, you've got to be able to soften your heart a little bit and work through those things. Because it was 2010 when I came back to Ohio, and it didn't take us long. It was a pretty quick thing. And then the next thing you know, you and I are at the same church together, church that you and a bunch of the guys that I love started, and there you and I were. Yeah. Now on a worship team together every Sunday, on stage together again, 15 years later, but doing it for the Lord.
Totally different.
And it was amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah.
And we still do it to this day.
Yeah, right.
Here we are in 2025. That's the first time I said it since we've turned the year. And you and I have been doing that now, since 2010, which is amazing.
Yeah, the old guy. I'm the older guy.
Well, you're always going to be the older guy. I can't catch up.
No, not quite. But I think it's so important. Like, and it is a cultural thing in what we live in today, that you can't, 20 years ago, a presidential debate, I know I'm not going to go into politics, but a presidential debate, they would disagree. They would have a debate. They would completely disagree with one another, but they would shake hands cordially. Mm-hmm. They would take pictures afterwards cordially. The election would happen, and that night somebody would concede.
Right.
And they would congratulate the other side.
Right.
Now we live where you can't agree to disagree.
Right.
And the Bible all through has people not agreeing all the time, know, and people not agreeing with how Jesus was eating a meal with this prostitute or eating a meal with this tax collector or whatever, but like he still loved them.
Yeah.
And then he tried to teach as he was doing it. And so we're called to love. Mm-hmm. We're called to show grace. And so we need to be able to have those disagreements. And when we got back together and I was able to lay that stuff down, which was like taking a huge weight off of me.
Yeah.
Because I was carrying it because I loved you, and yet I was holding this over you, and now I could lay it down. We had that was an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
Not easy.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to do that.
Hugely freeing for me, because I didn't carry anger or resentment towards you, but I knew there was a break. Mm-hmm. I knew I'd hurt you by leaving, and I knew I wanted that relationship back. Mm-hmm. And knowing that we were able to have that conversation and rebuild that bridge is awesome.
Yeah.
So here's the chunk of the message that I really want to get into and really spend time in. You and I use this phrase a lot, and I'm sure people have heard doing life together and what that means. And I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like to be in Christian community. And, you and I've had this conversation a lot where I've worked with a client, oftentimes a pastor, who is surrounded by people but really isn't doing life with them. Mm-hmm. And the difference between being in community macro versus being in community micro, and really being invested in people's lives. And so let's just do an overview and talk about that, and then we'll kind of get in the minutia a little bit of what that looks like.
Boy, that's, the transparency and humility are probably two of the cornerstones of what it's going to take to do that. Mm-hmm. And so whatever community you're in, if you're not willing to be transparent and to be full of grace, it's it's probably not going to go well. Whatever relationship you're in, you know.
Right.
I mean, if for anybody that's married, you got to have grace and love, and you got to be humble, or your house is going to be a rocky mess.
Yeah.
So, Christian community, it's not like it's any, I think people think it's some magical, elusive thing. And I think it is elusive, but I don't think there's any magic to it. I just think it's, you love one another.
Yeah.
You're full of grace towards one another.
Yeah.
So, in an accountability standpoint, if I'm struggling with something, and I'm sharing with you, I know that I can share that with you, and you're not going to judge me back. In fact, what you're going to do is you're going to show me grace, and then you're going to want to encourage me on how to help me through.
Yeah. And follow up on it.
Yeah, follow up on it. Which is, I guess maybe that's the other part, is just time.
Yeah.
And effort, because it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
Our relationship didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of years to build. And, but then once it's built, you don't have to think about it. It's just natural.
Yeah.
And so, I think I know a lot of people. I've family members who long for what I have and what they see in our community, because it's not just your family and my family. Like, we have other families. It's
a big
broad.
circle.
Yeah, it's a big circle, and so they don't get it, and so it is this kind of like magical, elusive thing. But I think I just think the culture that we built, and this goes back into high school, was that whole thing of laying down a life. I'm going to lay down my life, and I'm going to, I want to dig into yours, and I want to live life next to you. I want to be in the muck and the mire, shoulder to shoulder, and I'm going to lift you up. And then I know that if I'm falling, you're going to lift me up. I don't have to ask you to lift me up.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, we see Jesus model this, and the idea of the surrounding of the 12, and our president, Dr. Crosby, wrote a book on this called The One, and it's really interesting. But the concept of Jesus insulated himself with a group of guys that he was doing life with. And it wasn't the tax collectors and the prostitutes. That was his ministry.
Right.
The ones he was doing his life with was these guys that he was traveling with. And I think a lot of times people miss that part, and I'll talk to people. It's like, oh, I'm hanging with people, in the bars, and I'm hanging with people. And it's like, oh, no, wait a second. And I've been there. I mean, I've shared my story 1,000 times. But the thing is, you will end up looking like who you hang out with.
Right.
There's no question. And in a culture that we live in right now, in our extended circle of friends, you'd be hard pressed. Not that everybody's perfect, because we're not.
No.
To see a marriage that's unsuccessful versus culturally,
right,
you're hard pressed to find a marriage that is successful.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you look at the dynamic of it's like, well, I intentionally, because I want to take care of my family, have surrounded myself with guys who know how to lead their families, who know how to love their wives, who know how to, again, it's not perfection.
No.
It's not what I'm saying. But when you look at the group as a whole, I would say we all more lean towards we're all in healthy marriages, have relatively healthy lives, and all of those things, versus what culture is showing.
Yeah, and those healthy marriages they're not perfect.
No.
And there's rocks and valleys and tsunamis that hit some of these marriages.
Yeah.
And we've lived through some of those. And but again, that community surrounds, and you lift up and you encourage and you follow up and you put in the time and you put in the effort and you keep checking in and see how they're doing. And, and by the grace of God, those marriages have held together and they're flourishing and doing amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not, they had to put in the work.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing, I think, with the community.
Yeah.
You gotta be willing to put in the work.
Yeah.
And it's not just the fun.
Right. It's the hard work.
It's the hard.
Yeah. I've talked about my marriage a lot on the podcast, and you were the one that married us, which is still one of the greatest honors I think ever. And
Huge honor. Huge honor for me.
but I think probably one of the things in my life that I felt like was most ministering to me was the years that my wife and I went through the miscarriages and the infertility. And, I know we're looking back now years ago, and I'm sharing something that you never would have done. Like, hey, I want people to know what I did.
No.
But I think it's important for the conversation of going, you showed me something in that time that now I do in life with others. And I don't remember if it was every day, but it seemed like it was. For years, you reached in and checked in on me. Mm-hmm. And every day, every morning, afternoon, hey, man, how you doing? Mm-hmm. What's going on today? Any news, any updates, and then we would get another disappointment or another, horrible event would happen. And dude, you were so consistent. It was incredible to me. I just remember going, at what point is he going to stop? Like, not because I wanted you to, but it's like, he can't keep it up. Like, year 1 went by, year 2 went by, year 3 went by, year 4 went by. And I'm like, he's still every day, hey man, I just want to check. How are you and your wife doing? How are you doing? How can we be? And dude, I'm telling you, out of all the things in our relationship, that's one of the things that will be one of the longest lasting impressions of my life of going, that's how you love a brother. Because, going through that, it's hard for everybody. There's no question. And my wife obviously took the brunt of it. But there's not a lot of understanding of maybe what the husband's going through, but you filled that gap for me. And it was huge. And I just think that's one example. That's just one example of what doing life together. And I've taken that, I've stolen that in a good, godly way, and have utilized that, and hopefully tried to reciprocate that when you were going through some tough times too.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And we, it's, again, once you're doing life together, it just comes naturally and it's easy. And so it wasn't weird for me or hard for me to think about you guys. I mean, Nicole and I were praying for you guys. We were thinking about you guys. She's checking on Amy, and, we had miscarriage. So she's like, there's a little bit of, a little understanding, even though every situation's different. And it's, it wasn't hard. Yeah. It's just something that you do. And you did the same for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had, some lawsuit stuff that happened and
wasn't your fault.
Wasn't my fault. And some extended family, what the word, but used to be family stuff that happened, and you were checking in all the time, and I appreciate it because it was hard.
And it's like sometimes just knowing that you can't fix the problem, but somebody's there. Yeah, is super important.
Yeah, because and I think that's the. It's like when this is not to go morbid, but like when you go to a funeral, sometimes you just need to be there. Mm-hmm. Don't say anything.
That's right. Yeah.
But
sometimes it's better just to hold the space.
That's right. Just to hold the space. And I didn't have an answer for what you guys were going through, nor did I pretend to even think I would have the answer. Yeah. But, just to hold you up. Mm-hmm. And comfort, however that could be, and and check in, which again is the time thing. Yeah. It's not you gotta lay your life down. Yeah. Jesus taught that. Yeah. And so when you're doing community, you gotta lay your life down. Yeah. Which means, you're not always thinking about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing too, it's not always just spiritual stuff. It's just hanging out. Yeah. Having dinner. Yep. Go to a movie, go to a concert. Yep. Whatever. It's it's just
watching a game. Yeah. It's all that. Yeah. It's like your kids. Yeah. Like, love your kids. My kids love your kids. And it's like, you just be together and they're all playing.
I'm still explaining to my kids, because they call you Uncle Jay. Yeah. They don't understand why you're not my blood brother. Like when we get together, my brother and I are there. And but why do I call him uncle? I also call Uncle Jay uncle, but it's like, well, it's as close as you get,
Right.
Which is beautiful. And you love our kids well, and they love you. And I love the fact they call you Uncle Jay and Aunt Nicole. And
Yeah.
so about 8 years ago, I remember feeling like I was hoping to kind of like get this deep relationship out of some other pockets of my church life, and it wasn't happening. And you and I kind of had that in high school, into college. And I'll never forget, I remember calling you going, hey, what would you think about like getting in the Word like every day?
Yeah.
And, that seems like a lot, but I mean, I know you were in the Word every day.
Yeah.
I was in the Word every day, but what if we did it together to see, what we might be able to get out of that? Because I know for me, at that point, I, as you had already, I mean, I'd been through Scripture a lot. It's like I was very aware of it, but I just kept feeling like, man, I need another perspective. I need that, that iron sharpening iron thing. And you and I kind of birthed this like, well, all right, let's just do a study and see how it goes. We're here 8 years later.
Yeah. Right.
And let's talk about that, because I think it's something everybody needs.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I look forward to in my day. And I just think about, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. In the last 8 years of doing that, I think I've grown spiritually exponentially more than I would have had we not done what we started 8 years ago.
For sure. 100%. Yeah. I mean, that study is not, again, it's not earth shattering, right? I mean, we have the Bible app. We pick out some studies. We do them every morning. We used to like message in the Bible app. Now we text and get a conversation going, which has grown me. And so that's why I said 100%, because it's grown you, it's grown me. That perspective that you have and some of it is, how you think about Scripture, but it also is what's going on in your life right now and the perspective that brings to that Scripture. The Word is living and breathing. And so your perspective makes me go, oh yeah. Wow. And it like highlights something that I completely missed in that study. And so, I love what we do because it's grown me exponentially as well. So
we've done, we'll do a study in the Bible app, in the YouVersion Bible app. Then sometimes we'll get a book and we'll do the same thing. We'll go, do either a couple pages or a chapter. Last year, we decided to tackle the entire Old Testament in a year. And that was a challenge.
Yeah.
I feel like I've read through the Old Testament many times, but never quite like that. I don't think I ever gained that much insight into what was going on from, the beginning to the end of the Old Testament. Glad we're taking a year off from maybe next year we'll do the New Testament, but because it was grueling.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things, like we started talking about like texting when we were talking about doing it. And then you had this idea of having this like Google Doc that you could show to your kids one day,
right,
of some of your notes and thoughts and whatever.
So we have notes on every chapter of the Old Testament.
Yeah. And it gets to be a lot, but it was great.
Yeah.
It was hard because it gets really grueling to listen to Israel screw up over and over and over.
Yeah.
And then over and over again.
And then over more.
Yeah. But to have that perspective and to dig into all that, I've read through the Bible before, but not like that.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things you got to put in the time, you got to put in the effort. But it was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I share this with people because I know when I always know when you're in the Word, because I usually get an immediate response, and usually I'm in the Word around the same time, but then I don't respond till a little bit later because I've got little kids. You have older kids, so my mornings are a little different. So I get the reading in, and then I'll respond a little bit later, and it's like when I see that come in, I get real excited because it's like I'm excited to see what you think of whatever's going on that day, how it relates to your life, and then usually I'm in some type of response. And then we've got another buddy that who's been on the podcast before too that has been a part of it, and then he'll chime in. But I think I know for me, and I'm sure for you too, that first part of my day is imperative,
key,
and I try to make sure, and I'm not perfect at it, and it's not, we do it Monday through Friday. We take Saturday, Sunday off, and then get back into it on Monday. But I try to get up and read those things before the rest of the family gets up, because I want that first, I call it my tithe of time, that first tithe of time to go to the Lord.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that I think is good. It motivates me those mornings where I'm like, not feeling it.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling it. And then my phone dings and I go, oh, Jay, he's already in the Word. And it's like, it's a great motivation because at that point I have no excuse.
Yep.
And there's days over the last 8 years, probably if culminated months, that I probably wouldn't have gotten in the Word.
Right.
Had I not seen you chime in. And it's like, oh, Jay did a study today, I got to get into it, which is, a huge motivation and something that keeps you on course. I mean, I don't think I probably would have finished the Old Testament last year had you and I not pushed through that, because there were times where I was like, I don't know if I can do this today. Like, these people, if they do this again.
Yeah. It was tough but pushing through, and then, being able to, I mean, I haven't looked at that Google Doc to see how many pages, but it is significant of what was written. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the spurring on of one another, right? So like even if, you're commenting before me, like it wants me to do the reading, wants me to do the comments, wants me to dig into what you're saying rather than just glossing over it and then not making a comment. It's not a guilt thing.
Yeah.
It's a spurring one another on. I think, again, the Bible, right? Jesus sent them in pairs. He sent the disciples in pairs, like go, but not one of you. Don't go hang out in the bar by yourself,
right,
trying to do ministry. Take someone else with you, because you need someone there that's going to help you.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's so important.
Yeah.
And I think everybody needs to do it.
Yeah. And I believe that if you're open to it, if you're in prayer about it, because I know a lot of people right now are probably sitting there going, oh, I don't have a friend like that.
Yeah.
I didn't meet a buddy of mine or a girlfriend of mine in high school that I have a 30-year relationship.
Right.
Everybody's story is not the same. But here's the thing. You and I were very intentional about it in high school, and we're enjoying the fruits of that 30 years later.
Right.
You can start that now.
You got to start now.
And I always tell people, it's like, today is the first day of the rest of your life. So you can either continue to procrastinate and continue to do the same things and hang out with the same people, or you can intentionally make that shift and go, you know what, I'm going to get plugged in at a church. I'm going to get plugged in at a community group. I'm going to get plugged in at a shelter where I can serve. I'm going to get plugged. There's a billion different ways of going, how do I change my environment that I might get connected with like-minded people? And that's the organic way that things can develop from that. But if you keep doing the same routines and not allowing yourself to be open to that, your front door is not going to fly open with your best friend who you've never met yet flying through it.
No, for sure. And I think you're like, for folks that are listening, you might try the small group, the community group, and it might not click the first time.
Right.
So then, it's also finding someone that, like you said, that's like-minded, but someone that you have that chemistry with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's much like you're not meant to marry anybody out there. There's somebody that has that chemistry. It's the same thing in when you're doing life, especially again. I mean, if we look at Jesus, right? He had the mobs, he had the crowd, he had his close outskirt, he had the 12.
Yep.
But then there's the 3.
That's right.
And so you might find a 12, but to get to that 3, there's got to be that chemistry. There's got to, and it's just not. You can't force it, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so you may want it, but you can't just force it.
Yeah.
And so there should be some of that organic, natural camaraderie that happens.
Yeah. And seeking out people that you see it.
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
know, I think that's like one of the things. It's like I've always, no matter where I've been at in life, I've always had a Paul in my life.
Yeah.
That's something that was ingrained in me, as a young kid, is always seeking out somebody that I want to go, that's what I want to look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or whatever. And even to this day, I still hang out with some of the guys that my dad introduced me to years ago. They're in their 60s. And these guys are just unbelievable to me. You know, I think of like Tony Galletti's and, the guys like that, is where I'm just like, man, I aspire to be that guy.
Right.
But the thing is I seek them out. They're not always going to find me.
Right.
But I'm always looking, going, what do I want if my life doesn't look like the way I think it should, then who do I need to seek out to start modeling that? Yeah.
And where, right? I mean, you're not necessarily going to find that at the bar.
Right. Or you won't.
You won't. So, you gotta go to the places where you see it and go to the places where those people are at, which, I mean, churches, not every church is, no church is perfect.
Nope.
Not every church is great, but there are some good ones.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good ones that are going to fit people differently.
Yep.
And that's why we have so many churches out there. And so you got to find that then gets you involved. Or it might be a ministry. I mean, it might, like you said, like go in and serve. You might find a ministry that you're serving with that's not necessarily part of a church, but you're shoulder to shoulder with someone, knee deep in the muck and mire serving, and you're gonna link arms with that person. You're gonna find that camaraderie. I think when we were talking before, it's like, whether it's World War II or Vietnam vets, these guys that were in the foxhole together, I mean, they're in knee deep.
That's right.
In the crap, but they will have lifelong relationships.
Yeah.
And so when you're serving like that.
Yeah. And I know you and I are close to the Akron area, and people listening maybe other areas, or, we're kind of close to Cleveland. There are so many nonprofits that I'm a part of just in Akron that you could connect with. They're always looking for volunteers and service, but that's where it's going to draw you in to those that's where those people are.
Yep.
That's where they're hanging out, and you need to find that.
Yeah.
Dude, I love you.
Yeah. Love you, man.
Really do. Yeah. I appreciate you, being on here. And, I've thought of probably a dozen different shows that you and I could have done together, but I'm really glad this is the one that we landed on. I mean, we could have talked about a billion other things in our relationship, but I think this is one of those foundational things that it saddens me, because I think a lot of people go through their whole life.
Yeah.
And, you and I have been so blessed to have, I can name a half dozen guys right now that I'm doing life with. I know you can do the same.
Yep.
To think about people that I've met who have gone their whole life and can't name one.
Yeah.
Is heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking.
And the thing is, and we can wrap kind of with this idea, we weren't created for that.
No.
God's design was not for us to be in that isolation. Now, I do believe the enemy pushes us more and more towards that,
for sure,
that isolation. And obviously, I think that's where he has a field day with us.
Yeah.
But it's harder and harder to do that the more insulated we are with, our people.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's the, again, from the beginning, right? God created man in our image. Let's create man in our image. There was never a singularity in it. And I love the scripture in John 17, where it's just like God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. It's like they're just throwing praises back at each other. And they're saying, I want you to be in them so that they can be in me, and so that they will know that who you are, because they see, they see you in that. I mean, it's like this beautiful cycle. And that's what we're created to do, for sure. And, I appreciate being on the podcast. It's, I've listened to your podcast. I love what you're doing. I've told you before, I think what your listeners know, and maybe they don't know fully, of how gifted you are as a musician. But I think when you got into your counseling and what you were doing with that gift was a God-given gift that you then used. And now what you're doing is you're then pushing that out over the internet.
Or the World Wide Webs.
the web.
Yeah. Well, you had a big part of shaping a lot of that, and I appreciate you invest in me as a young guy, and then now as an old guy.
I'm an old guy.
Well, I'm an old guy too, so we're still doing it.
We're going to stay seated, because if you hear us stand up, we're going to groan when we get up.
Well, dude, I appreciate you so much,
Yep.
and thanks for spending time with us, and just sharing this stuff on the podcast today.
Yeah, love you, man.
Well, thank you, Jay. I greatly appreciate your time, but even greater, the lifetime friendship that we have. God knew that we needed to be in community together. So many of the issues over the years I've seen counseling people are because of broken relationships, or the lack of relationships, toxic relationships, etc. Many folks struggle with depression and anxiety because of interpersonal issues. Relationships are tough, but they're worth it. I'm so lucky to have multiple relationships and friendships that have lasted well over 30 years, from grade school to middle school. I know not everyone can say that, but I encourage you to look. If you can find one or two other people who support and encourage you, and you do the same for them, it can make a big difference. Or if you don't know or don't have those relationships started yet, start looking for a deeper, healthier connection with people you admire and people you inspire to be. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.